Welcome to Discover Health, a White Mountain perspective. I'm your host, Dr. Tom Barella. On this program, today especially, we're going to discuss issues that are very salient to our community. And our program today, I think, will affect almost everybody, everywhere. We have a special guest today, Miss Nancy Martinez, who is up in the White Mountains to teach a program to our first responders relating to how to deal with people with special needs. And I'm going to say welcome to you, Nancy.
Thank you.
And we thank you for being up here in the gorgeous mountains. And we were talking beforehand what a gorgeous drive it is up here. And we, of course, think it's wonderful here anyway. That's why we live here. Nevertheless, you are here to teach a very, very special topic that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, I think, in dealing with people with special needs. And, well, you know that because you're here to teach it. But an unusual topic, and first thing I'd like to know is just how you got involved in teaching this program.
Okay. I'm a civilian that works in law enforcement, and my chief of police was interested in bringing a disability awareness class to our yearly training for our officers. And I am a mother to a little boy with special needs. So having that window into both worlds is how I became interested in creating a class that would meet the needs of police and then later fire.
And so you created this class.
I did, but I had lots and lots of help from the wonderful officers that I learned from every day. So they, I present it, but I really think that they drove the content.
Okay.
So.
And what is the name of this program?
Navigating with Knowledge, I think. I haven't looked at the title lately.
But Navigating with Knowledge is part of it. And up here, the program is called Be Safe.
That's a different part of the training that's going to happen tomorrow. So
Okay.
Be Safe was created by a woman named Emily Island from California.
Okay, so those are the programs that you're up here to be involved with.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all right. We can give credit to other people when the credit is due. So the easy way to do this is to start is what is so special about the needs of first responders, whatever they are, in dealing and interacting with people with special needs?
Well, each condition obviously is very different and affects different people differently, so it's very individualistic. Different domains are affected in terms of social interactions. So if first responders maybe don't know about sensory processing issues, they might not know that all the things that they arrive on scene with may be distressing and even painful to a person who has sensory processing issues. A person may have difficulty with social cues. So if someone is attempting to speak to them and get information from them, they might not know the importance of responding to those questions, things like that.
Well, I know that this was a big special issue at least about a year ago when there was all over the public, the TV about a policeman shooting and actually killing a person who was autistic. And even though the people in that area were telling the policeman that that person had special needs and to be careful. And so that led to an issue in terms of how to deal with special needs people.
Yeah.
And I'm also think about the old show Boston Legal.
I'm not familiar with
You're
that.
probably too young to remember that. I get to say that, where one of the lead lawyers had Asperger's syndrome and had difficulties with social interactions. Do a lot of these people with special needs have difficulties dealing with other people?
It really depends on the individual, but by definition, autism is a communication and a social disorder. So navigating through those social situations can be very difficult.
And stuff. And the number of people with special needs is how pervasive? How many people are we talking about?
In the United States, the estimate is 1 in 6 has a developmental disability. The CDC's latest figures for autism are 1 in 59 8-year-olds. Down syndrome, it's about 1 in 700. And fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, it's very prevalent, but it's hard to get good numbers. But I understand the prevalence rate is maybe even exceeding autism.
And we have a significant number of children up here and people, adults with fetal alcohol syndromes or fetal alcohol effect. So very, very wide spectrum of people could be potentially affected. Now, it's not only the first responders that have difficulties. Is it not true that the general population has difficulties too?
Absolutely, yeah. If you don't have a loved one with a special need or maybe have any prior experience, sometimes behaviors can appear odd or suspicious. If you don't know how different people might communicate, it might be different. It might be difficult depending on what profession you're in to work with that individual. So
I knew through my experiences, many physicians even have difficulties dealing with special needs people and directing their commentaries directly to them too. And so for first responders, how do they know how to deal with people with special needs?
How do they know how to deal with them?
How do they learn?
How do they learn?
I mean, what? Well, maybe the better question would be, you know, what do they need to know about dealing with special needs?
Well, I can say from what I've learned from the wonderful professionals that I work with that de-escalation techniques and strategies are taught from basically the very first week in the academy. So classes like mine, classes like CIT, are contextualizing those skills for working with this population.
And CIT is?
Crisis Intervention Team. Yeah.
Thank you. It's just an acronym to those of us.
Yeah.
And so
we talk about sensory processing disorders, executive functioning deficits, theory of mind deficits. Take a look at, in my particular class, I focus on FASD, autism, and Down syndrome. So we look at the behavioral characteristics that are common for those conditions, communication challenges, how to overcome those communication challenges, how to think about the whole sensory scene.
we'll get in. We're going to ask you in a few minutes to tell us how you teach these guys. But what is sensory deficit or sensory integration disorder problems? What does that really mean?
It means that a person may have difficulty with how their brain and their senses are interacting with each other. So a person may have extreme sensitivity or an undersensitivity in various areas, all within one person. So I think does that answer your question?
But that sensory processing disorders, I mean, how does that lead to difficulties in the first responder situation?
Well, for example, with pain thresholds. An individual may have no reaction to clear and severe physical trauma, or they may react very strongly to the lightest physical touch. So obviously that makes it very difficult not only for families, but medical professionals, fire, EMS, when they're assessing a patient. I have many friends who state that their loved one, perhaps on the autism spectrum, may exhibit self-injurious behavior, and then they'll later find out that there was an underlying medical condition. The person is nonverbal, so they're not able to articulate perhaps that they have a tremendous earache or something is hurting. So that's one way that having those sensory processing issues, different pain thresholds, may be challenging to the people around, as well as the individual, obviously.
And some of these people also have auditory processing problems, do they not?
Correct, right.
And that can be incredibly important.
For sure. Law enforcement survives and thrives on communication, and police officers, typically are going to use verbal directives to stay in control of a scene. And particularly for people with autism, Those auditory processing issues may make it very distressing and very painful. So that can definitely create a risky intersection. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, going back to the example, at least that I started with, and I'm sure you have other examples. I mean, this policeman interacted with this person with autism, and the person with autism essentially did not respond because of the pervasive interactive difficulties that people with autism have.
Right.
And look at how the situation escalated.
Right. One of the things that we're finding is very helpful is a voluntary registry. So many cities are creating a voluntary registry where caregivers, family members, self-advocates can fill out a registration form and provide first responders with critical information that's important to know about them prior to an emergent situation.
And where is that repository stored?
Police departments. So police departments can...
I mean, we have considered that in several communities in Arizona about registering or having some kind of an identifier for people with special needs. And there's been worries about labeling people and having the police know that there is that type of person in a particular home situation. Is it readily available to the police? I mean, is it on a profile that says, at 123 Main Street, there is a person with, say, let's say autism or Down syndrome?
Well, how it works is, so if, let's say a frantic parent calls 911 that their child is missing, and they say, my child is in your voluntary registry. Immediately, that information can come up in the officer's patrol car. So a photo, perhaps where they wandered previously, details about the best approach, behavioral considerations. So that's how it would work. And if they're responding to a call for service at a particular address, and obviously every agency has different infrastructure. In our city, when a patrol officer is responding to a particular address, a small icon will appear that shows that a person with special needs, a registrant, is at that address. So that gives the officer a heads up what to expect. And if time and conditions allow, they can view on their screen all the important information to know about that particular person.
So if our community wanted to get involved with developing that for our community, who would we contact?
They can contact me, and I can
right.
put them in touch with some wonderful people who helped create our program in our city. So.
And that's going to happen before you leave our community.
Fantastic.
So, you know, that is one example that I gave you. It's probably an extreme example because it was all over the national news. Can you give us any examples of other kind of interactions with first responders that might trigger concerns? I know you have examples.
Like successful outcomes, or
successful outcomes or non-successful outcomes?
One of the things that we go over in my class is search and rescue for a person who may be nonverbal and may not respond to their name when called. So outside the box, adaptive approaches are very important. There's a wonderful example of a little boy that was nonverbal, went missing in the wilderness, and the parents worked with the search and rescue team and told them, we don't think he's going to respond to strangers calling his name. So they recorded Daddy's voice and blasted that over the PA, and they also recorded his favorite music, and that was the trick. That was what helped draw him out. So it's those kind of very creative approaches that are really fantastic.
Well, that's interesting. Wow. Had never thought about that, but of course that's what it's all about. Do you have any other interesting examples? I mean, I know you teach a class.
Dozens and dozens, yeah. So something else that comes to mind is we had a particular young man that had autism with some co-occurring conditions. And about the time he hit puberty, a huge spike in calls for service to his home. And we're talking 12, 17 calls for service a year. At one point, an officer noted in his premise information, so that's information attached to his address, that his particular interests were a particular football team, and he liked to make flowers out of duct tape. So that special interest was used by the next officers who responded to his home to de-escalate. So it was a behavioral meltdown. The officers walked in and were able to gain a rapport with him very quickly by knowing beforehand what his special interests were. So that's just another example of how working in partnership, all of us coming to the table to figure out where are the gaps and how can we help each other.
Wow, two completely different examples. Mine related to communication difficulties, and another related to de-escalating a situation. So and then you gave the example of sensory problems. So you know, if somebody, for example, responding to an accident, you know, where a person is injured in an automobile, if a first responder gets into a situation like that, and you have somebody with a sensory integration problem, how does
overcome that?
Yeah, how does that first responder deal with the situation, because they don't know ahead of time who's in the automobile.
Yeah. And I had talked to a firefighter in southern Arizona who actually responded to a call for service where a teenage boy on a bicycle was hit by a vehicle. And when they attempted to stabilize him, he was reacting very, very strongly against their help. And they were attempting to communicate with him, and they really did think he may have suffered a brain injury. But a person who was just walking past happened to recognize him, and he was a person that lived in a group home that she had volunteered at, and he was on the autism spectrum disorder. But one thing that families can do is there's seatbelt covers that they sell that can have a person's diagnosis. On the inside cover of the seatbelt cover is a pocket to hold a card which would have the doctor's information and more specific information about the individual. So if firefighters, police officers responded to that car accident, they could know immediately what that person's baseline condition is. There's also a House bill going through the state legislature which would allow participants to place a sticker on the rear driver's side vehicle of the vehicle, and that would notify the first responders that a person with special needs is in the vehicle and alert them that they could check an envelope in the glove compartment. So hopefully that gets passed into law. So there's a lot of different things that people
Well, you could do that without having a law. If everybody recognized the universal symbol for...
The universal symbol, yeah.
Is there a universal symbol?
There's not. I mean, there's different decals that families may place on their vehicle. But going back to your point, some people don't want to advertise that a person who's vulnerable is in that vehicle. So it's sort of, it's kind of
because we're a society that labels a lot.
Slope. Yeah. So.
Those are really good points. These are really good. So how do you go about teaching first responders? I mean, how do you do it?
Well, really, I'm a student. I'm a student first and foremost. They are wonderful teachers and help me understand the incredibly demanding jobs that they do. So I think better understanding what they do helps me provide credible, relevant information that's practical. I try to keep the class engaging, so I use lots of body-worn camera footage in the class. So I feature calls for service that show successful outcomes, and the officers love seeing that. And I have several agencies from around the state that send me footage. So we share lots of calls for service, both from the officer's perspective. So I try to sit down and chat with the officers who actually responded to those calls, as well as when I can, I try to sit down with the families and get the perspective from, get perspectives from multiple people.
Now, is not part of your program up here that you're going to be teaching is how special needs people interact with first responders?
Yes.
So the opposite issue.
That's the Be Safe curriculum. That's an important piece of the public safety puzzle.
Right.
We can train first responders for years on end, But if our young people are not understanding how to interact appropriately and safely with uniformed first responders, then we're only addressing one side of the equation.
So how do you go about teaching special needs to interact with first responders?
So Emily Island created a wonderful curriculum. She made a movie, and she uses real actors with autism and real police officers, and they are it shows different scenes of these interactions involving police and people with special needs and their successful outcomes. So it's using video modeling to show how an interaction should go, which is very powerful, and it's evidence-based. So we get officers and community members in the same room. We play games. We do role-playing. We watch segments from the movie and discuss what we're seeing. And it builds relationships and mutual understanding.
So you have special needs people, real special needs people involved with this Be Safe program?
Yes, that's who the curriculum is tailored to.
Right.
So we invite local police and local community members. And for many of these people, it may be the first time that they're having a positive interaction with a police officer. So it's really transformational. It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And even though you haven't had your particular program up here, you should know that this community supports this this program that you're going to do tomorrow to an extent that we had more volunteers of special needs people than you needed to do your program. We had twice as many respond positively to be
That's fantastic.
essentially your class than you needed.
That's wonderful.
As examples. And I think that's because we all recognize that whether it's because of this national travesty example, that's such an important interaction is really part of the safety, I would say, for special needs.
Absolutely.
Special needs people. So when you do this program, people just you go through examples and they take it from the videos and stuff that you have?
For the Be Safe part?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, it's 3 hours long, and it's just wonderful. Like you can see magic happening. It really is. It's transformational.
Transformational for who?
You know, I think for everyone. Often, you know, police officers may not have had the opportunity to sit down with a person who's differently abled, and so it's eye-opening for many people.
You know, I think a lot of people who do not have a special needs person in their household, if you ask them to sit down and talk to a special needs person, that they would feel very uncomfortable and unsure of themselves. Do you see that? Do you see that happening in your classes when you start the classes? These Be Safe classes?
Very rarely, but
Really?
but occasionally, or maybe they hide it. I don't know, but very rarely. I think the officers who come to the event they're very interested, and they're hungry to learn more.
So obviously you have a lot of experience doing this, and your program is obviously very good. Where do we need to go from here in terms of teaching communities? Where do you is this the only deficits that you're seeing, or are there other difficulties along the way?
As my journey continues in being a special needs mom, I have come to learn that there's really not any area in the public that couldn't benefit from learning more about intellectual and developmental disabilities. So swim instructors and the water safety industry and teachers and nurses and doctors. And so I think it's just coming to the table and having these developing partnerships to learn more about each other and how we can help each other grow.
And I think in general, as a mom of a special needs child, I would think, I seem to think that a lot of special needs individuals are protected from dealing with the general public and society. They're kept in kind of a cloistered environment or protected by their families, and so they don't have a lot of public interactions, at least relative to how easily a person without these disabilities might negotiate the public.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel as a parent of a special needs person, but sometimes dealing with the public is difficult because they look at your child differently. They interact with you a little bit differently, a little bit. I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
Oh, no, yeah.
But it's all related to this same phenomenon of having to be, to not feeling comfortable.
Yeah.
And that's really what your program's about, isn't it?
Yeah.
To teach them
absolutely.
the skills to be comfortable,
To be
both
comfortable.
from the patient standpoint and the first responder standpoint. Surprisingly, we are almost done. And I'm really impressed that our community has responded so well to your program coming up here. I think you will find that when you do your program tomorrow that you will be pleasantly pleased with the amount of people that have responded to this potential program. And we clearly appreciate your taking time today before your program tomorrow to talk to us and spread the word a little bit further.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
And this is our program today for Discover Health. We hope that you can have gotten enjoyable information out of this. And until we meet again, I will say be safe and also be healthy. Thank you.